morning, everybody. Welcome to the Board of Commissioners meeting for February 11th, 2020. I'm going to just state a few announcements for the day, and then we'll move on. We have 3 time certains today, one at 10, one at 11, and one at 1:30 p.m. We have one exec session today, which we'll do in the afternoon. I expect that to be roughly around 4 o'clock. And tomorrow, Wednesday the 12th, we also have a time certain at 1:30 with a redistricting presentation from a few folks from out of town. So we'll move on to item 1, adjustments to the agenda. Are there any adjustments? Okay, seeing none. Any emergency business? No emergency business. So we get to move on to one of our favorite times of the day, employee recognition. Mr. Mokahysky, could you lead us into that?
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I'd like to invite Mo Young and Laura Vinson up front here to join me. Gosh, 2 of our favorite people. Mo and Laura have been, 2016, did you both join Lane County in 2016? Yeah. In your current roles?
Yes.
So Mo worked in Health and Human Services before her current role, and Laura came from outside of Lane County for newly created positions in 2016. Mo Young is our Equity and Access Coordinator, and Laura Vinson as our Recruitment Coordinator in Human Resources. So Mo's in County Administration, and Laura is in HR. Newly created positions, which is an exciting opportunity, but also a challenge to sort of form and create the standard for what these new roles are going to bring. And I can't imagine what these roles would look like without these 2 individuals having taken them on and just done an incredible job. So been here in these roles since 2016, and these are 2 of the most actively engaged employees in our organization. They are everywhere in the community, volunteering with NAACP and CASA, actively involved in human rights, social justice, and they demonstrate incredible care for our community and all the work they do, not just here in their jobs, but in their lives outside of this office. So we're inviting Laura and Mo here this morning to recognize them for the recognition that they received from the NAACP alongside other female leaders as 2020 MLK Women of Achievement during the Martin Luther King Jr. Walk and Celebration hosted by the Eugene Springfield unit of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in January. So as our Lane County's Recruitment Coordinator and Equity and Access Coordinator, Laura and Mo make a difference every day in our community. And I'll just say that, Laura was hired, this position of recruitment coordinator was created really to focus, because we understood, recruitment was a function that was shared by many other people in human resources, and we recognize the value and importance of that function in and of itself, and the importance of having a dedicated position to focus on recruitment efforts so that we can be the best at recruiting the best talent possible. There's also a very intentional goal of creating improvement in the diversity of our workforce. And so Laura has been just laser focused and on a mission in improving the diversity of our applicants and ultimately the diversity of our hires in the organization. And she can share with you some of the numbers, but we've seen an exponential increase in the diversity of our applicant pool, and we're beginning to see the results of the positive impact in terms of the hires that we've made. Another program that I'm really excited about that Laura has helped lead is our diversity internship program. This was an idea to create a pipeline of talent into our organization because we have so many outstanding higher ed institutions in this relatively small community, and we felt like there was not this formal way of tapping into that talent and creating opportunities. So this is a paid internship program, but the real focus was also to say we need to create opportunities for underrepresented communities to participate in the workforce in the public sector. And so let's really focus on recruitment of students with diverse backgrounds into give them an opportunity to work, to get paid in an internship role. Because our application process in the public sector can sometimes be challenging to navigate, once you get into an organization like Lane County, you build relationships and you're able to understand the complexity of the jobs and the services provided, and you build those relationships, it becomes easier to navigate and understand how to seek full-time employment. And so we've seen, the last numbers I saw were seven. Now we have seven individuals who have gone through our diversity internship who've been hired into full-time jobs. So it's just, this is one of these, she's snapping her fingers like we can clap for that. One of just the great things that that Laura has helped lead. And then Mo has just been an incredibly catalytic leader on our equity work, particularly in the past year, as we started this really in creating this equity and access coordinator position in 2016, hiring the right person for that role. Mo then worked to stand up our equity and access advisory board, to work with Laura, to work with Aaron Rollins, our training coordinator, as well as our purchasing coordinator and finance, to do all of, implement all of these investments in equity and access and inclusion that we sought to have. So we did began to do all these things and implement our training, our 3 hours of equity training for the organization. We also reflected on, we sort of completed the Equity 1.0 work and said, what's the next step? How do we evolve into a more really intentional, thoughtful, robust commitment to equity in our organization? And so Mo has helped to lead by bringing on a consultant and facilitating a process with leaders throughout and staff throughout our organization, and creating an Equity 2.0 roadmap that really looks at developing an equity lens and embedding that and operationalizing that within our organization, of making sure that the training that we provide for our employees is the best training possible, and making sure that we're engaging in really thoughtful ways around all of our equity work. So I know that was a lot. I get excited talking about this work and these two individuals in particular. And I just want to, on behalf of our organization, our community, thank both of you for my time's up. I heard a buzzer go off.
I didn't tell you I was timing you.
Thank both of you on behalf of our organization and on behalf of our community for the incredible work that you do every day here in your jobs and in the community to create a community and an organization that is truly reflective of all of our values and our goals here. And I want to invite, if you have, we don't always put folks on the spot, but I know you're used to being put on the spot. So if there's anything that you want to add or things you want to share with the commissioners, now's the time.
We were kind of hoping we could read the speech that we shared at the MLK event, if that's okay.
That would be wonderful.
Awesome. So I'm going to read the first half, and then Laura's going to read the second half, and we'll read quickly because I know you have time certain things. So imagine we have 18 other women with us. Each of us was invited to be recognized on this stage because of our work making meaningful contributions to our communities. Each one of us is doing this in our own way within the spaces of influence in which we find ourselves. The focus for this event is honoring the women of the movement, and none of us would be here doing the work we are doing without those that came before us and the women who stand beside us. Going along with the theme of the shared legacy for leading for justice and balance, we have decided that many of us would pool our allotted time together and make a coordinated joint statement. We honor the legacy of the women's suffrage movement and the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which allowed women the right to vote. The 19th Amendment was the largest expansion of democracy in our country's history. However, at the time of its implementation, women of color were excluded. This was the result of widespread sexism, racism, and enduring inequality within the ranks of the women's suffrage movement. It wasn't until 1965, when the Voting Rights Act was passed, that racial discrimination in voting was prohibited and people of all races were given the privilege to vote. Since then, the number of female voters has exceeded the number of male voters every single year, and yet there is still work to be done. Right now, there are movements around the United States to suppress voters through redistricting. In addition, voter rolls are being purged and polling places in neighborhoods where people of color live are being closed. Most states in our country have laws in place prohibiting convicted felons from voting. Today, as we celebrate women's suffrage and the progress we've made, we also recognize that across the country, the tightening of voting rights as they relate to identification jeopardize the rights of our trans and non-binary family. We will stay in this fight until every person eligible to vote can safely and equitably cast their ballot. As awareness of voter suppression grows, states are exploring options to increase access to voting. Florida and Kentucky passed laws allowing people that have been found guilty of felonies to vote once again. In Oregon, the motor voter law makes it so that anyone with an Oregon driver's license is automatically registered to vote. It is important that we follow the lead of these states and continue expanding laws to allow all people to vote. That progress requires community organizing and the passion of many dedicated individuals. Each of us here today has stories to tell about the women that came before us and paved the way. The grandmothers, the mothers, the aunties, the sisters, the neighbors, the teachers, and those we never met but know in our hearts and in our bones. The stories and words of these women hold us up and keep us moving forward. Our work allows us to honor them. For example, we are here because of the work of Ella Baker, who's on the flyer for the event. Ella's work as an organizer and activist spanned more than 5 decades, from W.E.B. Du Bois, Thurgood Marshall, Pauli Murray, and Fannie Lou Hamer, to Rosa Parks and the man for which today's holiday is named. Ella Baker's life is a testament to the power of showing up and being critical of leadership that is not inclusive nor grassroots. She exemplified that a movement takes organization and a commitment to mentoring tomorrow's leaders.
Each of us here on stage hopes to follow in Ella's inspirational leadership model, and we have gratitude for her and the others who came before us. The presence of our ancestors and predecessors helps us to feel empowered, to feel joy, and to not fall into the traps of despair or bitterness. It is important for us to honor the elders who gently school us when we need to correct our course and provide a listening ear. They remind us that none of this is new, we all have a role to fill, and that they are there to support us even when they've passed on. As Linda Hogan wrote, "All my ancestors are behind me. Be still," they say, "watch and listen. You are the result of the love of thousands." Many of us became active in shaping our communities because of barriers our own families, loved ones, and communities experienced. We became stronger as they showed us examples of how to overcome. But the work is about much more than acquiring basic rights. Now is the time to flourish. It is time to shift our paradigm from survival to empowerment. We must not be ignored or pushed out. It is crucial for us, the collective us, to continue carving out space for our voices. We are creative thinkers and crafters of solutions. Each of us in this room has the capacity to act as ambassadors of light in this world. Today we can honor the vast amount of knowledge, experience, and perspective we bring to our community. By believing in ourselves and trusting our vision for the future, we will move our community towards justice and peace. We will elevate all voices and leave no one behind. We are building a foundation for the women who will come after us. We are here to remind you, particularly our young ones, that standing up for justice may be hard, may subject you to isolation and retaliation at times, but there is a community of women who stand with you. In fact, we are surrounded by innovative creators who are teaching our children, running nonprofit organizations focused on economic security, food justice, health, and environmental justice, shaping policy in local public institutions, amplifying the voices of the unheard through podcasts like Black Girl from Eugene, collecting and preserving her stories, filling all of our bellies with delicious food, and so much more. As the brilliant Toni Morrison said, remember that your real job is that you are free. You need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. None of us on this stage do our work in a vacuum. We are strong because of our supportive communities. This includes the people in our lives who challenge sexism, raise children as partners, step back and listen, cheerlead, share home and movement building, who give us space to dream big and support us in making our big dreams become a reality. Thank you to each of you who are here with us today. In closing, we would like to share this poem by the phenomenal poet Rupi Kaur. I stand on the sacrifices of 1,000,000 women before me, thinking, what can I do to make this mountain taller so the women after me can see farther?
Don't leave yet. Don't leave yet. That is such a fabulous speech. I was there at the MLK March and heard it then, but it's so good to hear it repeated and repeated. Are there any comments from the board? Commissioner Farr.
Only one. You know, we're the board sitting here, and when I think of both of you, I think of boards. Laura, I think of you in a wakeboard.
Yes.
And Mo, you'll know what I mean by this. I think of you in a whiteboard. The long hours we spend in front of that whiteboard. Thank you.
Anybody else? Commissioner Bozic.
Just like to say that this is not the first time I've spent a, post MLK congratulating Mo for an award. I think I was at the Shed when you got one a couple years ago, wasn't it? So, great work, and Laura, great work that you've been doing, and great speech.
Commissioner Brady.
Congratulations. Quick comment to our CEO, who is obviously so moved. I believe the NAACP is not a unit as in a military unit. I think this is the local chapter of the national NAACP, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe February 21st, there will be the Freedom Fund dinner. Is that correct? Which I encourage everyone in the community to be a part of. It is the most inclusive organization in this community that I'm aware of. I would like to make a statement about how far we have to go. While we congratulate the very deserving acknowledgement, very cool that it's on the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, the 100th anniversary of the League of Women Voters, et cetera. In 1987, a friend of mine, African-American guy, Chuck Smith, in charge of the Pacific Telephone Foundation, was in California, was discussing how they were reorganizing all their foundation's resources so that it looked like the demographics of their ratepayers. And in California, it was interesting to talk about underserved communities because in that state, the minority is the majority. We are moving at such an accelerated pace on the ground towards equality, and I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think that's part of why we're seeing the kind of voter suppression that we're seeing in different parts of the country, because it's a reaction to that. I would also like to, well, I guess I could go on and on, but this is your moment, and I salute you for your moment and all that it represents. And you know that I resonate with the causes that you articulated. Thank you.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for not only your service here at the county, but also your leadership in the community. And secondly, I think that at the heart of this for me would be that you've been given certain talents and gifts and opportunities, and you're trying to pass that along to others. That probably is the most important thing. So thank you.
I admire you both. I think it makes Lane County very proud that you're out there in the community spreading such good words. You're such a great role model for people working here at the county and all over our community. I know that in our whole staff at Lane County, there are many that are like you. They're bold, you're impassioned, you've got moral character that we can stand behind. I'm just so proud and appreciate you so much for your work. And I know that leads all of us at Lane County forward, because we know there is so much more work to be done. Congratulations. Excellent. All right, we'll move on to public comments. Looks like we have one. Lon Otterby, if you could come up, state your name and where you're at.
Wow. Impressive morning.
Yes.
My name is Lon Otterby. I reside up on the Mohawk River in Chair Bucks District, and I am really gratified to be here today for this as a longtime member of the NAACP to see this happening, and I want to thank Steve for all your work in putting this together. This is really important. And thanks for remembering Watsonville there, Commissioner Burney. All the exciting things that were happening back in those days down there. I'm just here this morning to thank you all for making the decision to open up the properties over by the fairgrounds for low-income housing. That's a critical need for our community. I sympathize with Commissioner Bozovich's concerns. We certainly have to have good planning for putting something like this together. And I'm also grateful that the date for this afternoon session on housing and homelessness got changed from the 4th to the 11th. I was thinking I had missed it when I was out of town when I first saw the agenda. So thank you all for what you're doing.
Thank you. Anybody else here for public comment? All right. We'll move on to item 5, Commissioner's response, remonstrance. Anything anybody has to say? Commissioner Farr.
Actually, this is under the other business. I just wanted to mention Carry It Forward as they're moving forward on county property. Ms. Mokrajewski, you're aware that they have issues with electricity out there, and they've had a couple of contractors come out and say it's not a job that they would touch. Somebody stole all the wiring out of the buildings, all the copper wiring. So we have a task of reinstating the wiring. And just wanted to let you know that we're working on a strategy there, Mr. Mokrajewski, to get that building in shape and make it so that we can put washers and dryers in there and eliminate the need to use public facilities, public laundromat facilities. So they're moving ahead very, very nicely. And Owen Masta Spain and her staff are doing pretty amazing things, including they have I believe it's 4 residential sites inside the perimeter right now that are very well managed. And I had a chat with some of the business owners nearby, in particular with there's a motel very close by. And he stated to me that at night it seems as though they have a security guard. And that's the presence of the people who are actually camping on the county property. So things are moving forward as well as I had hoped. And I think that the neighbors, by and large, are appreciating the presence and the way they are operating at the county facility there. So thanks for making that happen, Mr. Mokrajewski.
Any other comments? Okay, I see none. We'll move on to the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? Got one move. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Sorensen, second by Commissioner Burney. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously.
Chair Buck, I would encourage people watching to read the consent calendar because there were some pretty momentous items on that consent calendar today.
That's true. All right, we'll move on to Public Works. We are on item 7A, the first reading and setting of the second reading and public hearing, ordinance number PA 1380, in the matter of the Eugene Springfield Metropolitan Area General Plan to adopt amendments to the Eugene Airport Master Plan and adopts savings and severability clauses. File number 509-PA19-05770. And we have Lindsay Eichner here with us. So please feel free to give us a little summary of this one.
Yes, so we are being asked to co-adopt the airport master plan update. We held a joint planning commission meeting in November, and it went very well. The presentation was really good. I'm excited for you guys to hear about it. And we'll be holding a joint public hearing with you and the city council at the end of the month. And it'll be on, like you said, it'll be on a Wednesday evening, February 26th at 6 p.m. here. And the reason for that is it's a Metro Plan amendment, and that body or that document calls for joint public hearings for these refinement plans.
Questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Farr.
This area is near and dear to me. Back during the last, after the census, during the last district realignment, that section of the city of Eugene, which is an island around the airport, it had been historically in my ward, Ward 6, and the staff had put forward a recommendation that it be moved into a different ward, and they asked if we had any hopes and wishes for the realignment of the districts, and there were some very nice moves that took place to balance out the districts as far as population were concerned, and Ward 6 became much smaller geographically. But at my request, the airport was left in Ward 6, or remains in Ward 6 as of this census, and so that is a part of Bethel that we're talking about right now. And you're looking at it on the map right now. I believe the master plan allows for a little bit more industrial area to be probably a little bit more city expansion as well.
Yeah, there's a whole redevelopment plan in the master plan. So I think it'll allow for an enlargement of the airport as well as more supporting and accessory uses out there as well.
Yeah, the new, what I call the new runway, which is being used pretty extensively right now, used to be where Bond Sports Complex was years ago. And we bought our house out there before the runway was there. And when we were building the runway, I was in favor of it, absolutely, but it made it so that Bethel School District couldn't build what is now Meadowview School at the end of Terry Street. So it was a catalyst for Bethel Park, which is a K-8 school, as well as a American Legion baseball facility and a large community park. So all of this is really a positive part of the expansion of the city of Eugene. But the one thing that I will always mention when we come to talking about the city limits of Eugene is how far is it from Eugene to Junction City? Well, the sign says, I think, 14 miles. But in reality, if you hit Highway 99 and shot a golf ball, you could put a golf ball from the city of Eugene into Junction City. It is that close. So as we look at expansion for residences, and as we look at expansion for whatever urban growth boundary we look at expansion, bear in mind that if we aren't careful, and we started talking about this in 1995, the cities who are more welcoming expansion, as clearly Junction City was when they expanded down to Meadowview Road, the cities will move into the central metropolitan area. So we've got to be aware of that and wary of that at all times. Thank you.
Any other comments? Commissioner Bozic.
I just want to say real quick, I've been involved with the airport master plan since I relocated water mains for the new runway and ran new water mains in to support the airport helicopter hangar and get the correct fire flows for the airport established when I was at EWEB, and I've been tracking the master plan since then. But just to answer your question, how close together is the city of Junction City, the new urban reserve study area touches the UGB of the city of Junction City. So the plan for future expansion is to have the two cities touch just like Springfield and Eugene do. So,
And in fact, there are city limits pushed to the edge of their UGB right there too. So it's along the city.
So it's very close. You won't need to swing a golf club. You can just kind of toss a pebble.
Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the first reading and setting the second reading for second reading and public hearing, ordinance number PA 1380, as stated for Wednesday, February 22nd, 2020 at 6 p.m. time certain here in Harris Hall.
So moved.
Do you
20
need it?
Did you say 22nd or 26th?
Says the 26th.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misheard you.
No, it's good. Got to check.
Second.
All right, moved by Commissioner Burney, seconded by Commissioner Sorensen. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. We'll see you February 26th.
See you then, thank you.
Welcome. All right, we'll move on to item 8, Health and Human Services. We'll start with the first order. I'll read it, although I'm going to state my conflict of interest right after that. It is Order 20-02-11-08, in the matter of approving 3 contract amendments with St. Vincent de Paul and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the approved amendments. We have Karen Gaffney, Director of Health and Human Services, here. And I'm going to declare a conflict of interest. I'm related to the Executive Director of St. Vincent de Paul, who is a party to these contracts. So I do believe this is an actual conflict of interest, and I'm going to pass the proverbial gavel over to Commissioner Burney to run this particular item. I will exit the room, and if somebody would be so kind to let me in when you're done, I appreciate that, and I'll turn it over to you, Commissioner Burney.
Thank you.
The very-
Notice she didn't give me the gavel, yeah. This is the moment, I might say, Karen, that I've had mass anxiety about ever since I accepted the vice chair of this board. This is my first moment.
We're in this together.
I presume that the microphone is now yours to make a presentation.
Yes. Commissioners, this item is a short item and is typically actually one that would be on consent calendar as routine business, but because it does involve contract amendments with St. Vincent de Paul, we've put it here for a separate vote. This specifically extends time and budget for a series of contracts that are longstanding contracts that we have with St. Vincent de Paul in our work in the Human Services Division. I guess what I would lift up is, again, our continued commitment over the long haul to address needs and issues related to people who are homeless in our community. So that is the nature of these contracts, and they are all amendments to existing contracts. So I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Commissioner Farr.
Mr. Chair, because of the 5-minute time limit, I will say nothing, but I'll think everything.
Move approval.
And yet, there's a motion to move approval. A second, further discussion? Hearing none, I have a question, and that is, it looks like these are not insignificant percent increases to existing contracts. Am I correct in assuming that this is not a change order we get in construction because they misgauged how much something was going to cost, but it's in fact an increase over the duration and type of services provided?
Thank you, Chair Burney, for that question. Indeed, it's not at all an error or an underestimate of cost. Typically, when we're able to increase amounts on these contracts, it's because we've identified additional revenue sources that are available and are passing those dollars along to subcontractors.
Thank you. Further discussion?
I will just say that thank you, Mr. Chair. I was out there this morning on 99, and at the time when the people moved from dusk to dawn to the Lindholm Center for meals, and the passage was very smooth. There's a crosswalk there, right? The city helped install, but it's on Highway 99, which is a state facility. That crosswalk is worn out. The paint is worn. So I'm just making that statement right now, and I'm not sure whose job it is to repaint that, but the crosswalk needs a little bit of revamping. And also, people don't really recognize that there's a crosswalk there. That's just for future discussion.
Other comments?
Yeah.
Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. I'll just say that, all 3 of these amendments just reflect this board's commitment to providing additional services to our vulnerable population here in Lane County. And, folks go click on the view materials and you can see we're talking about veterans, homeless singles, and female homeless youth. So some pretty significant people that need help. And this is just a continuation of our partnership with St. Vincent's to provide those services and expand those services.
Further discussion?
Which I know that's what Commissioner Farr was thinking.
It appears we have commissioners that can read each other's minds. I apologize, I'm not part of that group.
I knew you were going to say that.
I guess I am. It's been moved and seconded that to approval of Order 20-02-11-08 in the matter of approving 3 contract amendments with St. Vincent de Paul and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the approved contracts. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? It's unanimous, 4-0. Ayes have it. Commissioner Buck excused. Thank you.
The next item.
There's
that I-
another item, and my guess is, as much as I'd love to chair this, I don't get that opportunity.
I'm sorry that failed.
Thank you, Vice Chair Burney. I am now back in the room, and we'll move on to item B, Order 20-02-11-09, in the matter of approving 1 contract and 7 amendments and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the approved contracts. Again, Ms. Gaffney.
Thank you, Chair Buck and Commissioners. Our agreement with the board is that anytime we have new contracts, we would not place that item on the consent calendar, but give an opportunity to talk about those new items, and of course, any of the amendments I'm happy to answer questions about as well. In today's package, the new contract is a contract with Pacific Source in their capacity as the CCO. As you know, we've been working since they were online beginning in January to establish a series of contracts with Pacific Source. So this is the next in that series, and it provides really reflects our partnership around our youth system of care. We have had a longstanding partnership with Trillium as the CCO in this community, and now this establishes one as well with Pacific Source to support the county in our role as coordinating the high-end system of care for kids in our community. We have a governing body for that group that includes our juvenile justice partners, the schools, mental health, the hospitals, and others in the community to really bring people to the table to develop single plans and systems for serving those youth in our community of highest need. And even though we have 2 CCOs in our community, there's a commitment that we really have a single system of care. And so the county will be facilitating that on behalf of both CCOs.
Great. Commissioner Farr.
Chair Buck, thank you. I would at this point declare a potential conflict of interest since my wife does work for the other CCO. However, based upon information that I've received, I do not believe I have a statutory conflict of interest, so I will continue in the conversation and the vote.
Good. Anybody else? Commissioner Bozovich?
So just once again, I would love for the folks out there that might be watching the board meeting to click on the view materials under this one, because as you read down the contracts that we're either signing or extending and increasing the amounts of, we're providing some critical services, again, to vulnerable populations in Lane County, from healthcare services to housing for homeless youth under this set of contract amendments. And it's just really important work that we're doing, and sometimes goes unnoticed by the public that we are one of the largest healthcare providers in the county, really, when it comes down to primary care in particular. We are the largest, and I just feel like sometimes it goes a little bit unnoticed about, that county government is actually that piece of county government just some people aren't even aware of. They know we maintain roads, maybe, have an election office, but providing health care sometimes just completely goes under the radar.
Anybody else? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve Order 20-02-11-09 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Burney, second by Commissioner Sorensen. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. All right. I do not believe we have any county council announcements. And so we have a little lag time till our 10 a.m. certain to fill up the space here a little bit. Why don't we move to Commissioners' business on 15, and I'll ask if there are any announcements from commissioners. Commissioner Bozic.
I'll just state that I got to have a really fun day last week with about 9,500 other friends up in Salem last Thursday. It was quite a showing from the rural communities and some of our industries that might be the most impacted from a bill that's in front of the legislature. I also had the opportunity to spend the day in Salem yesterday with a bunch of our fellow commissioners, which I believe 4 out of 5 of us were there yesterday. So always good to get up to AOC. And tonight I'm going to be speaking to the Professional Land Surveyors Organization chapter here in Lane County. They asked me to come and talk a little bit about some of our fees for filing surveys, et cetera, and the problems they're having with how that's kind of preventing people from doing something as simple as a property line adjustment because our fees are so high. So I'll bring that feedback back to the board. And finally, I want to say that I attended a work session of the Veneta City Council last night where the city is considering partnering with the Fern Ridge School District to place a school resource officer in the Fern Ridge school system and pay a portion of that cost. The sheriff was there, Cliff Harold, and the sheriff's office is actually doing what they can to stimulate that by helping cover some of the cost internally, particularly the startup cost of a new vehicle. So it's kind of a interesting to see how creative people are trying to get some level of presence of law enforcement out in rural communities. But it's also interesting that in the meetings that the school superintendent had with parents, teachers, and students, the idea of a school resource officer was brought up most often by the students, and consistently in every group he met with, that's something that they wanted to have in the schools. So it was driven by the students, this initiative. So it looks like they may come to some kind of agreement. They're working through the details now.
Very good. Commissioner Bernie.
I don't know if I have enough announcements to cover this amount of time. But thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to join you. I wanted to share that in 2 of the meetings I attended last week, one the Lane Transit District Strategic Planning Committee, and one the MPC, the Metro Policy Commission, both are integrating their own carbon reduction goals and strategies as they move forward into their planning. So I simply wanted to acknowledge, as it relates to that, that our Lane County climate action planning, when we, as we both look internally and look externally, there are a number of significant entities that are also moving in that direction, and it would be a sin of omission if we did not coordinate all of those activities under one umbrella. So I wanted to mention that. I was surprised the degree to which this is occurring, and I may have contributed a bit to it too, who knows. I also wanted to share that, especially given the first employee recognition we had, that this seems to be primary season again in our area, and in Springfield, for the first time in Springfield's history, there is a Latinx candidate for the Springfield City Council, and I think that that's occurring in some of the other races also, where persons that have been underrepresented historically are standing up, speaking out, and engaging in the process, and I see that as only positive. Finally, I was going to defer to anyone else that might want to say this, but I would like to share, bring to people's attention, it was in the Register Guard today. I happened to be aware of it before this was signed, but there was what could be historically one of the most significant compromises, if not the most, in the timber industry in the state of Oregon signed yesterday, where many environmental groups, all environmental advocacy groups, and timber industry leaders signed an agreement, a pact. The governor announced this yesterday, and that pact was a compromise by which the timber industry is going to reevaluate its harvest schedule and processes and attempt to integrate some of the suggestions that otherwise would have looked like statewide ballot initiatives in November. And it's just such an incredible, wonderful example of people working together and compromising. Because as we all know, it's far more difficult to bring people together than it is to divide and conquer. And in an environment where we're seeing a lot of people walking out when they're not getting their way, which is understandable, we are also now seeing everyone not liking a deal because of the compromises required, but nonetheless signing on to it in good faith and attempting to move forward with a path prescribed. I think that's a big deal, and I just wanted to share that. Thank you, Chair.
Any other announcements? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, too. Since we have a little bit of time, Friday at 1 o'clock we have our treatment court graduation, one of our specialty courts that helps people avoid jail time, avoid prison time, and actually helps people get on with their life and their families reunite. So that's at 1 o'clock in, I believe it's courtroom 4. The second thing I'm going to mention, I wasn't going to, but since we have a minute and since Faye Stewart is in the audience, I'm a member of MWMC, Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission, and for years I was blocked. First person to block me was Ruth Bascom. The second person to block me was Jim Torrey because they wanted to serve. The third person was Kitty Piercy. The fourth person was Faye Stewart. And Faye's sitting in the audience right now. And Faye, since you left, I became a member, and I really enjoy the work there. MWMC's commitment, and we talk a lot about environmental issues, and we've been working on environmental issues for a long, long time. Their commitment is clean water, community health, and the environment. They miss you, Faye. They wish you were there instead of me, but I'm trying to do my best. Faye, I believe you were on that commission for a dozen years. That sound about right? MWMC is a pretty marvelous organization. One of the pillars, you mentioned MPC, Commissioner Burney, MWMC is a pillar of intergovernmental cooperation, putting your resources together to do the right thing. And I hold that up as often as I possibly can. And that's why, starting in '65, I wanted to be on that commission. And now you're gone, Faye, I get to be. Thank you. This week, we'll be talking about waste-activated sludge thickening. I'm sure you missed that. So it's good to see you. And I want to mention also that Cottage Grove City Councilor is with us, Mike Fleck, who also serves on the Poverty and Homelessness Board with the Human Services Commission. And Mike and I spent a pleasant evening last Thursday talking about climate change.
Do you have any announcements, Commissioner Sorensen?
Yes, I wanted to mention that I visited with folks from Cahoots, and they mentioned that they're still having a lot of trouble with difficulty with people that they encounter who are homeless and usually co-occurring drug abuse and mental illness, and they have oftentimes no place to take people. And one of the things they highlighted was how many people that have physical wounds that they get from various sources, and they can't actually get clean because they have no place to take them. And they wanted to let me know that that was a really important part of the whole homeless picture, was how many people have injuries and they're not able to recover from their injuries. The other thing is that was mentioned, and I gave them the name of Alex Kyler, but apparently there is an effort to obtain money from the Oregon legislature in the short session on the topic of money to deal with the homeless during the period of the 2020 track and field championships for the, the 2021 World Track and Field Championships. And that they wanted me to know that this was apparently a possibility of getting these funds special to Eugene or Lane County and Eugene for purposes of helping the homeless during the time leading up to the big track meet. And I said I didn't know about that, but I would provide them with contact from Mr. Kyler. So I don't know if that's something we can get an update on or not, but I think that it'd be great if we could learn more about that.
Any other announcements? Mr. Bernie?
It's not an announcement. I just wanted to demonstrate that I too know about Mike Fleck. And I wanted to add to the resume that Commissioner Farr began that Mike is also my chair on El Rapa, taking over from the commissioner to my left, Commissioner Bozovich. And nothing but helpful and nothing but a role model. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, that's all, in that we have an hour.
We don't have an whole hour. Well, I just want to share that last Wednesday I went to the first meeting of the Lane County Parks Funding Task Force. This has come out of the Parks Master Plan that occurred right before I came on board here last year. And there was anybody and everybody who was interested in parks and funding them and willing to really volunteer a lot of evenings in the coming 12 to 18 months on how to figure out how to fund our parks better. And they're off to a great start. I think there's great energy in the room, but it probably won't come back to our board until about 18 months from now, approximately. There's a lot of work to do to figure out how to fill a $17 million gap and then ongoing maintenance. So that was my only announcement. We can move to any future board assignments or requests. Anybody?
Madam Chair, I wonder if you'd take a moment to talk about the Health and Human Services Commission at AOC yesterday. Commissioner Sorensen talked about legislation regarding potential money coming toward Lane County, and we talked about that a little bit. Is that something you'd like to state or talk about, or you were integral in the discussion there yesterday?
Well, both you and I were there, so feel free to chime in. But at AOC yesterday at the Health and Human Services meeting, all day really, we were talking about legislative items that we either want to support or oppose at the county level. And specifically in H&HS committee meeting, there was House Bill 4001, which is a bill with $40 million for emergency housing, and also a way in which to alleviate some zoning restrictions to place emergency shelters and other homeless emergency services. And that's currently running in the House. It's Speaker Kotek's bill for the most part. I was, of course, very supportive because we are now currently trying to talk about placing service centers here in the metro area, but it's going to be very important for many of our rural locations as well. There are so many land use restrictions as to where to place it, and it won't change any of the NIMBY arguments and anything associated with that. It just gives governmental agencies the ability, a larger freedom and ability to place these in places they otherwise wouldn't be able to do if it was a commercial center or industrial center land, and not have to wait through the lengthy process to rezone. Is there anything that you would like to add?
Just a couple of things briefly. As with most bills that end in 01, that is, it's the first one out of the gate, it stands a very good chance of getting legs and moving and being enacted. And of the $40 million, there are 2 counties that are particularly ready to receive it. 2 counties that are kind of, I guess, shovel-ready, and that would be Lane County and Marion County. So we stand to be able to help fund some of our projects directly with the passage of 4201. And significantly that the reason I asked Chair Buck to talk about it is because there was a movement to change one of the words from will to shall. And it was Chair Buck that began to resist the movement because shall would have been a real handbrake on the bill itself. And so we moved it through with the word will. Won't go into detail there because we only have a few moments, but well done. The AOC's Health and Human Services Commission has a great deal of impact on the legislature. So.
All right, with that, we'll do future board assignment requests. Anybody have any assignment requests? These are work sessions or anything in the agenda? Commissioner Sorensen.
After our discussion later this afternoon, I might have one, but I don't have one now.
Okay. We can move back to it. I have one item which isn't really a work session, but it's something that I think the board needs to consider, which is when we have, it's regard to county council's division, when we have invoices for fees for a particular case that exceed $100,000, to have the board notified and just be aware of rising costs for particular cases. Right now, we don't necessarily have a policy regarding that. But I think this would be prudent for board members to be aware of so that when future decisions on cases are made, we are well informed about how they've developed. Commissioner Sorensen.
Mr. Mokrehysky, a few years ago, we changed the rules about your authority to spend money, and I thought we upped the limit from $50,000 to $100,000. I'm not sure. Do you recall?
100 to 150.
100 to 150.
General rule, yeah.
Okay. And then wasn't there some kind of notification requirement, maybe above 50 or above 100 or something? In other words, your authority is to expend it, but you're supposed to notify us of some sort.
If it's a settlement, if it's a legal settlement of some kind, that's the commitment that Steve Dingle and I have given, that if there was any kind of settlement that was within the administrator's authority, but above 50,000, that we would notify of that.
Okay.
But not for just, there's a lot of contracts and things that the administrator approves in the regular course of business.
Right.
And it was deemed at 150,000. So, we certainly could do that, but it would be, you'd get a laundry list of.
Yeah. Does the, what Commissioner Buck just brought up, does the money spent by legal counsel fall within that? In other words, are you the person that actually approves that? And is it thus subject to the $150,000 rule?
So I believe the way that our policy goes is department heads, which would include the county council, have the authority to spend up to $50,000, I believe. And I'll check that. And then over 50,000, the administrator has between 50 and 150,000. Any items above 150,000, and this would be a contract that, if there are change orders and increases to contract over time, it's the cumulative amount have to come to the board. So any items above 50,000, so we're really talking about 50,000 to 150,000. For legal settlements, we would notify the board of.
Yeah. So
And I would also say, even a number under 50,000, if it was a substantive case that the board had been briefed on before, we would notify.
Yeah. Commissioner Buck, are you referring to amounts that exceed the legal counsel's authority, the $50,000 that any department director would have authority over?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, if there are amounts that are above 50 that are within your authority, I guess that's what the inquiry is about.
I had a higher threshold, just, but I'm just throwing it out there for everybody to consider.
Yeah.
Commissioner Bozievich.
So real quick, because we're coming up on 10 o'clock, we're supposed to get quarterly reports on all legislation from legal counsel in exec session. They haven't quite been quarterly. That would be one way of tracking costs and looking at that is in those quarterly reports. It's pretty rare to run up more than 100,000 in 3 months. But, that's, just, we probably just need to be a little bit more disciplined in getting those reports to some degree to keep track of some of these suits.
Yep, and that's part of why I brought it up, because I think we've been recently aware of some cases that exceeded $100,000 by quite a bit, and that came as a shock because we had no previous prep of that information. So it seems logical that we should, and maybe we can further this discussion at another time as well. Okay, we'll move on to County Administration, item 10A, order and resolution number 20-02-11-10, in the matter of approving an order and resolution supporting the City of Cottage Grove's multi-unit property tax exemption program. With us is Austin Ramirez, our Community Economic Development Manager. And if you could introduce your guests, please.
Yes, thank you for the time today, Chair Buck and Commissioners. Joining us from the City of Cottage Grove, we have Councilman Mike Fleck, Public Works Director Faye Stewart, and Amanda Ferguson, City Planner. We also have staff from Assessment and Taxation in the audience today to answer any questions. Everyone you see here has been incredibly collaborative and supportive. Assessment and Taxation really helped navigate us through some of the technical processes, and we've greatly appreciated the inclusive nature of Cottage Grove's process, not just with us, but with the other taxing districts. So the request today is to approve the Cottage Grove multi-unit property tax exemption program, right? This is a program enabled by state legislature to incentivize housing by waiving property taxes on new eligible housing construction for up to 10 years. It's important to note that that benefit does not extend to land value or commercial portions of properties for eligible projects. It really is the goal of MUPD is to reduce the operating costs of housing developments in the early stages to make it financially feasible overall. If a project's not financially feasible, obviously it won't be built, and the taxing districts won't benefit from the tax revenue or the housing, additional housing in the long run. So I'm going to pass it off to Cottage Grove to talk more about their process and the toolkit they've really built to incentivize housing that I believe is the most proactive in Lane County overall.
Greetings, Commissioners. Thank you so much for having us here. I think we actually forwarded already. We really wanted to give you a more comprehensive look at what we've been trying to do over the last couple of years, being the MUPD being one of the final tools that we're trying to bring into this toolbox. So we started 2 years ago with a housing needs analysis that we adopted in January of 2019 that really looked at, we're trying to look at our 20-year housing supply. Like a lot of the small towns in Lane County, we had almost no multifamily built for the last 30 years in Cottage Grove. 2018 actually saw the first multifamily in Cottage Grove since 1985. So we knew, even going into our housing needs analysis, that we had a large problem in that area. The HNA basically found that we have enough land within the city to meet our needs if we changed some of our policies and really redirected a lot of our focus on trying to meet that multifamily housing need. So that triggered a wide range of programmatic improvements trying to look at livability in Cottage Grove. Our vacancy rate right now is under 1%. So the general purposes for these projects, really trying to reduce the need to expand the city's urban growth boundary, trying to address economic development trying to encourage transit-oriented development, and trying to really remove some of those barriers to development in Cottage Grove and encourage more of that type of housing that we need. The first thing we did was actually bring our building permit services program in-house. So it's one of Faye's first initiatives as Public Works Director. We now offer building permit services and inspection service plan review to 3 different communities, Cottage Grove, Veneta, and Creswell. And it has reduced our plan review and our permit processing from what had been about 3 to 5 weeks under contract services to under 7 or 10 days. A lot of the building permits in Cottage Grove are being issued in a couple of days now. It has made a lot of our building department and the customers who are feeding to our building department very happy. It's been great. We also then, after we adopted the housing needs analysis, we immediately started a code audit. The code audit aligned with the adoption of House Bill 2001. So the code audit committee that was created by the city council also chose to address 2001 as part of their program. We adopted this January 13th of 2020, so just 1 year after our HNA, which we're really proud of. It actually dramatically removes a lot of the barriers towards multifamily housing. It also increases density standards in Cottage Grove. It lowered lot sizes. We now, of course, allow duplexes wherever we allowed single-family homes as part of the trying to comply with HB 2001. We also tried to remove some of the barriers towards design review and other problems that people had been facing with multifamily housing. So this goes into effect tomorrow, actually. And then council, in January, adopted a housing development cost assistance program. We have committed to spending $75,000 each year for the next 3 years towards offering SDC waivers and building permit fee reductions for projects that are funded by nonprofits or government agencies towards affordable housing. We already had 3 projects that requested use of those funds and that are moving forward right now. Dev Northwest is building 6 single-family affordable homes in Cottage Grove under a land trust model. Homes for Good is doing a 4-unit cottage cluster, which will be our first new cottage cluster. I'm very exciting, for veterans. And then the Village Coalition, which is a nonprofit in Cottage Grove, is doing a 13-unit tiny home development, and they're about half done. All 3 of those projects should be done by June. So we're excited that we already had people who were interested in using this tool. We're hoping that we'll be able to offer it again for the next couple. The resolution that the council crafted revisits this program in 3 years to see what kind of success we're seeing. And finally, we've been working on the multi-unit property tax exemption since about last August and September. In October, the committee that had originally formed for the code audit was continuing working on this project and made a recommendation to council that we adopt a multi-unit property tax exemption as part of the package. The HNA and the Housing Strategies Implementation Plan that we wrote following it really recommended this as a potential tool. It will allow for multi-unit property tax exemptions for properties that are built, for projects that are built within 1/4 mile of a fixed route transit, which does cover a good portion of Cottage Grove. It was adopted by council on the 9th of December. The Fire Board approved their participation in January 16th, and we're happy to say that the school district approved their participation on February 4th, so last week, which means that you are our final taxing district that we wanted to approach and see if we could gain your cooperation as well. I'm going to then pass this on to our other members.
Well, it's wonderful to be here today. It's kind of interesting being on the other side of the table, but it's great to be here and see some familiar faces. I don't know that I have too much more to add, but we've been really busy since we got the results of the housing needs analysis, trying to understand why we're not seeing investments and developments in our community. And we have 2 properties down in the Main Street corridor that have been vacant for many years. One burnt probably in excess of 25 years ago. And we had another establishment that I believe was the old building was tore down probably close to 10 years ago. And both current property owners are interested in building a multi-unit, multi-story structure, but because of the construction costs, they have a gap that they cannot find financing or make that business case for. And they shared with us that if this tool was in the toolbox, that it would bring their proposed developments into a place where it made sense and financially to be able to build them. So that was, one of another reason why we wanted to approach this. But as you can see, we've been super busy trying to find a suite of tools. So because we need housing in all areas, whether it's low income, middle, or just standard regular single-family residences. So we're here to answer questions, but I'd like to give Councilor Fleck. He has been with us the entire journey of this process, and greatly appreciated his commitment to finding ways to improve our housing needs.
Good morning. Thank you for listening to us. I've actually been pushing for some improvements for a number of years, because as Commissioner Farr mentioned, I actually contract, my agency is Community Sharing Program. We contract with Lane County to do basic needs, housing, and energy assistance. And the housing...
Why don't you get your microphone just
Sorry, a little closer.
for the record?
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Mike Fleck, 923 South U Street, Cottage Grove. I'm sorry, I lost my place here. So Community Sharing provides housing assistance in Cottage Grove and actually all of South Lane County. I've been noticing our clients having harder time finding a rental unit. As Amanda mentioned, we're probably under 1% vacancy rate right now. We have HTBA's Home Tenants-Based Assistance is one of the programs that we provide in Cottage Grove. We had 5 individuals that could not find housing until recently. We're at 2 right now that are still looking and cannot find a place that they can rent. So this has been a big problem for quite some time. So I've been advocating for the reduction in SDCs for a number of years to try to incentivize some more development. And I have to commend the staff, Faye included, that they've really stepped up. The only other thing I'll mention is another potential tool in the box would be an urban renewal district, which we've also contemplated. So that's another potential for the future. But this is a great step forward. I'm hoping that we'll see some development in our community for multifamily. As that HNA said, we need to build 69 units a year for the next 20 years just to catch up and keep up in our community. So, it's a huge problem, and we're trying to take a very progressive approach to that. And certainly we'd answer any questions you may have.
Excellent. Thank you. Commissioner Sorensen.
Well, thanks very much. And, Commissioner Stewart, you're still Commissioner Stewart around here. That statistic was pretty impressive as far as the impact of the change to take the function in-house. How long did it take you to do that?
Well, I think I started working on it fairly soon when I took the job, and it took me probably 9 months, and I think some stars and moons aligned. It was about the time that the Building Codes Division decided that they were going to make some pretty serious changes in the way building programs were instituted and ran in various different communities. So the hardest challenge was getting the city manager to support it, because he's been a city manager in excess of 30 years, and he understands that building programs are very, very difficult to operate and fund, and in most cases they take general fund to do. So I started out by just doing a proposal for Cottage Grove centric, and then as the requirements from BCD rolled down and they required some certain staffing levels, it required me to reach out and gather some partners, and Cresswell and Veneta joined in. And we've, I would say, about a year and a half, we're fully staffed. We're just finishing our second year. Mm-hmm. And, I don't want to be promoting items that are disingenuous, but we do, when it's time for the building review and plan review and put it out, if we have a complete plan, it's not unlikely that the review gets done within a couple days or 5 days. Where we're challenged with some items to put through the process is maybe they have a planning process that's challenging, that takes time to go through a planning decision, and those can take more time. But when it hits the building building's desk, we're ready to move and get it out the door.
Yeah, and do you have to put general fund money in or not? Was that fear realized or justified, or?
Actually, no, we, the first year we ran it, we had a $100,000 surplus.
Oh.
And so we've been able to build some reserves, and that helps us. The building program actually contributes to the assistance that we give nonprofits for building reduction in fee costs. We put $25,000 this year towards that effort. The year before, we actually didn't charge the swim pool, the school district, any permit fees for their swim pool. So we've been able to make, some really good contributions.
Great.
Be a partner.
Ms. Ferguson, I want to ask you about homelessness in Cottage Grove. We've gotten our 2018 and 2019 point-in-time count data for the county, roughly 1,800 for 2018, roughly 2,100 for 2019. We're expecting the 2020 data to come out. What portion of that is Cottage Grove? Do you have any idea?
I actually haven't heard what the point-in-time count was for Cottage Grove yet.
No, I mean for the last two, the 2018 and 2019, the ones that have been released.
Commissioner Sorensen, I'm not sure that we have, I have specific numbers, but I know that just in this recent point-in-time count, we had 28 reported at the community center, and we had 6 at our agency. So mid-30s is Cottage Grove area this year, just as an unofficial tally. There may be more than that. But
you know what the school district number is? Because I know the Oregon Department of Education requires school districts, and they count homelessness differently than the HUD point in time, but that number, by the way, countywide was about 2,400 kids.
And Commissioner Sorensen, I know that last year in the point-in-time count, they did an unofficial youth count. They did not do that component this year. I know that there are a few hundred, or at least a couple hundred that I'm aware of, under, as you mentioned, a different definition of homelessness, which would include couch surfing and other,
And one last question I have for you folks, and that is with regard to the other types of housing. Are you talking about Conestoga cuts, or what kind of other housing or shelter are you utilizing?
Commissioner Soren, if you don't mind, I'll jump in on this. So the city managers created a group that's meeting to look at issues. We're looking at doing our own Fuse program in Cottage Grove with potentially 5 units. Some of the partners at the table are Homes for Good. The county has certainly sent many representatives. We have South Lane Mental Health. We have my agency, Community Sharing. So that's one program we're looking at. Another is we have a potential Opportunity Village scenario that we're looking at, which would potentially have Conestoga huts, or maybe yurts. We have Pacific Yurts down in our area as a possibility for common space. So there are a number of things that we're looking at. After the Ninth Circuit Court ruling with Boise, we're certainly looking at this with a new lens. And I think that we're very hopeful that we'll be able to put some of these forward. I know that I've spoken with the county as far as SHAP funding for shelters. That RFP process will be next year, and so I think we'll probably be looking to apply for some funds. But I don't know what that will be at this point, but we are trying to be very proactive in these areas.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you for all of you 4 that are up here, and also all the folks from A&T that helped on this as well.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. First I'm going to look at you, Mike, because I've spent a lot of time with you over the last, how many years? How many years you've been a city councilor now?
Well, I'm in my 4th term as a city councilor, so I'm, 14, I believe.
A long time. And, when you're asked questions about homelessness and response to homelessness, you respond with an authority that doesn't come from reading a few paragraphs and citing statistics. You respond with an authority that really knows truly what is causing it. And the way out and pathways out of it. You describe that quite often at the Human Services Commission. You never miss a Human Services Commission meeting, rarely. You're also on our Public Health Advisory Committee. And the work you do for Lane County as well as your own community is exemplary. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm really pleased that I get this opportunity to say such in public, because I tell you that face to face all the time. But really, Mike, the work you do is remarkable. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
I just have a question regarding your vacancy rate. You're at 1% right now-ish. You stated that last Thursday night, and a few jaws dropped when they saw that. And you talked about how in Cottage Grove, like every other community in Lane County and up and down the West Coast, you need more housing. We need to build more housing. And we talked about the materials it takes to build housing, a few other things, but significantly, you talk about the housing needs over the next 20 years. Now, I've been a part of Envision Eugene, and that discussion's happened here. Eugene has made a decision to not expand its urban growth boundary for residential, presuming that everything lies inside of the existing urban growth boundary. We're looking at urban reserves right now, which is the next step. But that being said, taking into account potential refugees. Now, in Eugene, the city of Eugene, we think about refugees from hotter places, hotter, drier places. In Cottage Grove, there's another refugee, the refugees from Eugene. A lot of people are wanting to live in Cottage Grove because of the cost of housing in Eugene. And Cottage Grove has always been perceived as a less expensive place to buy a house. I think that gap is narrowing significantly. But that being said, I live in one of the more modestly priced home areas in town. I live in Bethel, and a house down the block from me in Bethel just sold for $369,000. How can people afford these houses when wages aren't going up at that rate? So you're looking at a multiple unit property tax exemption as one of your tools to provide more housing. The question that I have then, Amanda, is have you thought about more than just the organic growth that is occurring in Cottage Grove? What about the fact that more people are going to be wanting to move from here to there, because it's not a bad drive, as you witnessed this morning? Have you thought about that?
Well, yeah, and I'm certain that you've worked with housing needs analysis and the state legislation regarding that. It limits you to really looking at your current and projected growth rate, which is based, of course, on the last 5 years' worth of growth rate. So at that point, our HNA is based on a 1.3% growth rate. We know that that is likely to change. That also just means that we need to have a commitment to do a new HNA when we see that change occurring, so that we can actually start looking at additional growth coming from other locations. HB 2003 just recently triggered statewide housing needs analysis review every 7 years, I believe, for cities of our size. So we expect that we will do a new HNA in 7 years. So we won't wait 20 years to revisit this issue.
That's excellent. That is encouraging. Commissioner.
Mr. Farr, I'd like to share that one of the challenges the city faces right now is that we have parcels that are vacant that could be developed. And so myself and the staff have worked together to try to figure out what are some of the hurdles for these properties being actually physically developed. And we have an area that is above our service level for elevation for what our water reservoirs can produce or feed. And so we've been actively looking at locations for future reservoir sites that will help us serve those areas. Another item is that we have SDC funds, and I've proposed, and it's in the budget, that we will pay for the reservoir, where in the past, some of the reservoirs required for the development have been footed at the bill of the developer. And if I can reduce the cost per lot by $5,000, that's pretty meaningful to seeing that development take place. We're in a process right now of seeing an area being actually, the professionals are working on a subdivision plan with that promise from us that we'll be ready to build a reservoir when they're ready to come in. So I'm looking for opportunities to be able to reduce some of those hurdles and see the development. And that was pretty key in the development code analysis that we did, that if we could reduce our lot sizes, if it meets the requirements. We're seeing homes being built smaller, probably for affordability purposes. And if a developer could come in and actually take and produce 1 or 2 additional lots on a development, that may push that development into the paying stage. So we're working hard to find ways to bring down those hurdles and partner with our developers to see investments.
Well, thank you, Faye. You're describing a means of facilitation for housing development. That is to say, making it easier, whereas so often in jurisdictions we see the lip service to making it easier, but at the same time making it more expensive to do that. Your description of providing water, not at the expense of the developer or at the expense of the homeowner, but at the general expense of the community, which is going to derive benefit from longer-term benefit. So you're describing ways to make it easier for people to get into a house, and that is what we're all asking for. And Ms. Ferguson, there's something that you said. I write down quotes, and here's one that you're going to hear now and over again. This is just a clause, it's not an entire sentence. Our first new cottage cluster, I'm very excited. It will be done by June. Now, there's some words there that were really cool. You said our first, which implies it's going to be a second, a third, a fourth, more down the road. That's what I'm excited about. And as a cottage cluster, you put that in position with the Homes for Good development, which isn't necessarily a cottage cluster, but it's a development where you're finding ways to put more residential units on a smaller amount of land. And really, you're moving all this forward without asking at this point for an urban growth boundary expansion. That may come down the road, but for now, you're doing it by reducing lot sizes, you're doing it by increasing density, and you're doing it by innovative ways to add housing that aren't happening in other communities. You said our first new cottage cluster. Our first, I love that. I'm very excited too, and it'll be done by June. Thank you.
Commissioner Berney?
First, I want to assure you, Commissioner Stewart, who I've not had the opportunity to work with here, that it's as counterintuitive for me to look down as it probably is for you to look up. I'm going to vote to support this request and get you through your next hurdle or last hurdle. Very impressed with what I see as a common sense approach to simply chipping away and figure out every way you possibly can to facilitate investment. In my previous business, we always would start with what were the obstacles to developing. In our case, it was commercial and industrial retrofits. And the role of government was to provide incentives in such a way that it could leverage the private market to truly invest. And that's exactly what I'm hearing here. So kudos on common sense. I also am amazed that I was sitting at the AOC meeting with a commissioner from Josephine County, and I learned that that entire county has less than a 1% vacancy rate. So this phenomenon is so at our heels that I am observing people with good intentions but really don't know how to implement, oftentimes weighing in. And so I think your weighing in with an implementation strategy that's coherent and makes sense is something that will help communities beyond Cottage Grove and Veneta and Cresswell. So thoroughly impressed, and I would just like, because I get to take this opportunity that I've always been a fan of Cottage Grove. I stole your school superintendent at one time, 27 years ago, and his board secretary to work for the Lane Regional Workforce Quality Committee on their youth initiatives, and married a young lady that has taught in the South Lane School District for 30 years. So I'm enthusiastically supportive and looking forward to how this goes, requesting a copy of the PowerPoint. I didn't see that in our material. And I thank you very much for the presentation.
Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. And I'll say up front, I will be supporting the board order. You guys are doing some incredible work down there, and it's really impressive what you're doing to make it easier to build housing. And your work's kind of getting copied a little bit because I think Florence is finishing up their housing code relook for trying to do almost the exact same thing you guys did with trying to make it easier to build all types of housing in Florence. And they're struggling with the fact that they haven't seen any multifamily development at all down there. One of the issues, though, on the coast is it's really tough to get commercially rated contractors. Because once you get into that multifamily, you got to have commercially rated electrical and mechanical contractors, and they're not so easy to find on the coast. I don't know how easy they are to pull down to Cottage Grove, probably not as hard being right on I-5 and 20 minutes away from Eugene Springfield rather than an hour over the hill. But I really appreciate, what you've done with your building permit. What's interesting is your 3 to 5 weeks. I think there'd be people that are pulling permits from Lane County that would be pleased with 3 to 5 weeks, just from what I'm hearing from the building community. So going to 5 to 7 to 10 days, 7 to 10 days is incredible. I would love to see us emulate that in our building department. I love the fact that you're using SDC and permit fee reductions to stimulate affordable housing, rather than choosing the other side, which is, a construction excise tax or some kind of housing tax that's going to raise the cost of housing, taking that money into government and then trying to build the housing ourselves under prevailing wage with all the overhead of government. What you guys are doing about making it easier and incentivizing the private sector to provide affordable housing is the correct direction to go, and I believe you're going to be successful. It's one of the reasons why we're seeing our outlying communities outgrow Eugene. I think Eugene's growth rate is 0.9%. Where what was yours?
1.3.
1.3. That's a pretty significant difference. And I think Junction City and some other small cities that lie outside of Eugene have all been growing faster than Eugene, who's chosen to kind of go the other direction, start a construction excise tax, not expand their urban growth boundary, not finish up a housing code revision. They still haven't adopted an accessory dwelling unit, and, which had a shall word in state legislature. Our largest city still hasn't quite gotten on board with how to make it easier. So I just commend you all on that. I really appreciate the use of the MUPD to try and tip that balance just a little bit further. And you guys are doing a great job. And I really, Mike, we've been working together for a long time between LRAPA and other things. So I really appreciate that. And I just have to, real quick, off topic, you were on the Public Health Committee when they looked at aerial spray.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if you saw the announcement yesterday that Commissioner Burney made reference to today in his remonstrance about the deal that was made between environmentalists and timber folks, but that included exactly what the public health folks said,
That was our recommendation to your board, absolutely.
Yeah, was to expand those buffers because of the issue of not so much that there was a physical health issue, but there was a mental health issue with the stress around the concern over aerial spray. And expansion of those buffers kind of dealt with that issue. So that deal with the governor actually, met your recommendations from the Public Health Advisory Council. So sorry for getting off topic.
Very good. Well, today's a good day to boast about all the good work that you're doing. I very much appreciate the outline, and we talked ahead of time before this meeting, so I'm pleased to hear that both the fire district and the school district are on board. And I've said this before, and I think most of us who cover rural communities know that affordable housing is fundamentally different in rural communities than it is when you look at it in metro communities. The needs are different, and the way that you build it out is different. In the last little over a year now that I've been commissioner, I have not seen any other community go for every tool in the toolbox like Cottage Grove has done, and already implemented a variety of different kinds of housing styles and affordable housing styles within your community. You named a few on your board, but there's also, Magnolia Gardens expanded, and that's yet a different style of much-needed housing for those folks in elderly care that also want independent living. And you've got so much more in the queue, even with private development on Main Street that is also multi-family, and then more development in the queue for the school property. I couldn't be more pleased and more proud of all the work that you've been doing at the city, and I know it's more than you. The whole community really has come together to try to figure out this and have ongoing, regular meetings as to how to tackle it, because it's the percentage-wise of, having vacancy rates is not necessarily unusual for all areas, but the way that rural communities have to seek funding and the way that in which they have to build to accommodate for their particular needs is so vastly different, and something that needs to be spoken to at the table when we're talking about future money from the state or Oregon Housing and Community Services and how to apply it in appropriate settings for smaller communities. So thank you so much again. You clearly have support from the board for this particular order. I'm pleased to support it as well, and know that I am available to you at any time which you need it in order to advance these kinds of policies. You're doing fabulous the way that you are, and I'll be your cheerleader all along the way.
Thank you.
Commissioner Berney.
Sorry, not quite yet. Forgive my shorthand. Cottage Grove, you guys are great. You're good. Austin. What are you going to do to promote the toolkit and the experience that the municipality of Cottage Grove is and is going to have with other communities in Lane County?
Yeah, Cottage Grove definitely has probably almost every community knocking on your door asking how you did this in a variety of ways. In conversations with the other communities and even Dev Northwest, one of the things they said the county can do that would be most impactful is sharing that knowledge, providing technical assistance for all of the toolkits mentioned. While the county doesn't lead in some of these processes, we are at the table. And so the more we can help other communities understand what's available and how to implement it, working even internally with our assessment and taxation folks or land management folks, the stronger our whole region will be. So this is at the top of our list of things to share with communities as we do outreach and work sessions with them. And so we will continue to spread the good word.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Austin, for bringing that up, because as Faye said, you're already sharing your planning process with 2 of the communities. So you're spreading the wealth already. And through Lane County's help and facilitation, your model can be spread. But there's something that I forgot to mention. Legion Cottages and Cottage Village Project have something in common. Can you talk about that a little bit? Or is that softball too fast?
So the one-time funding that the county presented, which is
Yay.
awesome, and thank you so much. Absolutely, yes. We ended up, I believe it was $500,000 for the Cottage Village, and was it $250 on the?
For Legion.
Yes, Legions, thank you. Yes, thank you so much. That was money out of your one-time spending. Cottage Grove was a huge recipient, and I think because in part we were ready to go. You mentioned shovel-ready earlier, and we're ready.
And you were ready. I'm looking at Mr. Bunker High School right now. Last year, we provided $2 million in our budget. There was money that was kind of an unexpected surplus or unexpected money from Secure Rural Schools, I think is where it came from. Rather than, well, I'm not going to do any of the other. What we did with it is we put the $2 million out for proposal, and Cottage Grove was successful. Your area with 2 of those proposals out of the $2 million, you got $750,000 out of it, a pretty big chunk. And the fact that you were ready to rock and roll on it, I mean, you were shovel ready, was what put you to the front of the line. So, wow, that's really cool. The other thing I'm going to say is that Bethel School District has a long history of fantastic superintendents. Kent Hunsaker, Colt Gill, Chris Para, all were Cottage Grove school teachers. So, thank you.
I'm not the only one that stole.
I wasn't there for any of those.
Let's not plunder our rural communities anymore. They need good people.
They've got it.
Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Bozievich.
So I'll move approval of order and resolution 20-02-1110 in the matter of approving an order and resolution in support of the City of Cottage Grove's multi-unit property tax exemption program.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Bozic, second by Commissioner Burney. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And Commissioner Farr, I just want to share with you that I was blessed this last Thursday to spend approximately 13 hours with Walt Myers from West Yost, which you serve with on the Metro Wastewater. And he shared with me multiple times how much he appreciates you being on their board and the commitment that you have made to keep that partnership alive and strengthen it. So
He's very gracious to say that. I'm in awe of him. So. Thank you, Faye.
Thank you.
All right, our next item is 11 a.m. time certain. We have, again, a little bit of time before that. I was going to call for administrator announcements, but I think that he walked out the door.
I have another agenda request if you want to go back to.
Yeah, we'll go back to agenda request. Commissioner Bozic.
Thank you. So I've received an email from Senator Roblin's office forwarding a constituent concern about access to private burial grounds and the lack of any statutory language about that, and whether or not there should be some statute written that once there's a private burial ground approved on private property, whether there should be some kind of continued access for family members in perpetuity, and the issue around that. And the question that came from Senator Roblin's office was, would the Lane County be in support of that of drafting that kind of language? It does dance a delicate dance because I think in the particular constituents issue, it's a battle between estranged family members and access to a family member's grave. And there's an issue of, property changing hand and then trespass and other issues. When are they allowed access? Is there, if there's property damage or somebody gets hurt, who's liable? So it's not a simple subject. So I was looking to see if the board's even interested in entertaining that, and if so, if they want to set maybe some time to talk with our legal counsel and maybe Alex Kyler about that before we get back to Senator Roblin's office about, I couldn't speak for the board. I was asked if we would support it or not, and I just can't speak as one person for the board. So I'm kind of tossing that to the board if we're interested in considering that issue.
Chair Buck, I'm interested. We had a little bit of experience with that a number of years ago when Todd Lyon was killed in a tragic accident on Mohawk, and his mother, Ramona Kennedy, Ramona Kennedy Lyon, his mom, who was a former chief clerk of the House, they wanted to have the burial on private property, and we helped facilitate that. There wasn't much the board had to do, but I think it bears a discussion because I think it may come up more and more as we move forward. So thank you.
Board? Commissioner Sorensen?
I think that the real estate profession and the legal profession should be consulted. Also, the mortgage industry, because if you had that kind of restriction on property, it would potentially pose an obstacle for the development of the property, what's called in the trade, the alienability of the property. And I know I've seen that happen in other instances where people have done a private burial and then all the family members that are aware of it, they all are dead. Now you have this stranger's grave on the site, and so it's can create alienability problems.
There is. That's why I didn't want to answer the question to the board.
So I still had one on the table, which was talking about notification for dollar amounts coming before county council. That might also take a little bit more discussion with county council and the administrator, given what we've currently got in language to be notified for and what we're actually practicing doing. I'd like to explore that a little bit more.
I'm in favor of that, and I think just for overall fairness, we should also inquire about the quarterly reporting, because I think several of us have had requests, and I think Mr. Dingle's been willing to provide those quarterly reports. I just don't think we've examined them recently as a group. So I think that should be part of this. So it's just a whole review of the authority, what we understand to be the current policy, what the reporting's been, and just to make sure that that the amounts in excess of $50,000, up to $50,000 are being approved appropriately under our existing policy, and then amounts above that are being approved routinely by the county administrator up to $150,000, and then whether the board is being consulted on matters above that. And it sounds like it's just a series of questions and discussion to both evaluate what we're doing under our current policy, but maybe we should have some changes.
We have three
Yeah,
cards?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm good with that. I just would note that in the past, the agenda team has scheduled those quarterly updates sometimes on Wednesday mornings. And a good hour-long exec session on a Wednesday quite often is when that is easiest to make it happen, just so.
Good to know, because that hasn't been our practice the last
Yeah,
year.
yeah. So, but I mean, just that's happened in the past, and that it's just to try and find the time to do those quarterly updates and make sure they happen.
Very good. All right, we'll move back to county administration. Since we have about 15 minutes, Mr. Mokryski, do you have any announcements?
Sure, I have a couple that I can share with you. First, on that topic that we share with the board, we do have in our administrative procedures manual, Chapter 1, Section 2, it says that we will schedule an exec session with the board as permitted by the Oregon Public Meetings Law before finalizing the settlement of any disputed legal matter, litigation, tort, lawsuit, or potential lawsuit in the amount of $50,000 or more. So that's in there that we'll do that. I think probably where there's a bit of a gap in that policy is as it relates to legal fees. So it's usually there's a settlement amount based on the claims. And then in the case that was being referenced more recently, I think the issue there was the amount of legal fees associated with that, which is really separate from the settlement amount or the amount that's negotiated as part of a settlement. So just wanted you to understand we have a policy in place, and it requires that before that's finalized. So I don't know how that, if that applied in the case of this situation. So then there were just a couple of things that I wanted to note on. We had our recognition this morning with Mo Young and Laura Vincent, and I want to share a couple of additional things in addition to the laundry list of things that we shared with you on those two. LCOG, and Brenda Wilson is here from LCOG. We're really excited about a recognition that's going to happen there for our equity work as part of the LCOG Awards. We were also asked to present at the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, has its annual conference in April in Portland. And my understanding there's like 1,400 government officials that are going to attend that from around the country. And we were asked to participate, just going to bring up the group of folks, on a panel to talk about leadership on racial equity. There are 6 organizations that were asked to participate nationally, and Lane County was one of them, along with Asheville, North Carolina, the city manager there, Salinas California City Manager, the Ottawa County, Michigan County Executive, Dallas, Texas City Manager, Fairfax County, Virginia County Executive, and Lane County, Oregon. So we're really pleased to have the opportunity to participate in the annual conference, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity conference, talk about leadership on racial equity. And so really great geographic diversity on that panel. And it'll be interesting not only to share our story about the work we're doing on equity, but also to learn from others. And then Laura, Vincent, and Mo Young were invited to participate in a panel with the Alliance for Innovation. They do an annual conference called Transforming Local Governments, and it's really a case study based, their best practices, and local governments, cities and counties are invited to present their sort of experiences implementing best practices around the country. And so we were asked, Laura and Mo were asked to present on our equity work at the Alliance for Innovation Annual Transforming Local Governments Conference. So great opportunities there, not only to share our story, but to learn from what others are doing and continue to elevate the quality of work that we do here in Lane County. So that's all I have for right now, unless you have questions for me.
Commissioner Burney.
I find it poignant and ironic that Lane County would be talking about that subject with places like Salinas, California, where my broccoli processing and cold storage facilities serve the entire Salinas Valley as it related to free vegetables and fruits. Where in the late 1980s, there was one of the largest strikes in the country on the cover of Time magazine, involved in negotiating that, which was dealing with such things that we've gotten past, like living wages, health insurance, et cetera, for undocumented workers that became full-time members of their community. I'm just kind of curious what it is that we're doing that's so great and that stands on the shoulders of places like that. When you say that not only can they learn from us, but we can learn from them. Forgive me, I'm just curious.
All I can tell you is that we were invited to participate by the Government
Okay.
Alliance on Race and Equity. So they've identified communities and organizations that have led on, and I think it's largely around organizational efforts within, it is the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. So it's focused primarily on state and local government efforts to pursue equity work. So I'm not familiar with Salinas, and I'm not even catching exactly if your comments are more critical towards Salinas or that they've done some really great things
My
there.
comments are that the diversity that exists in that community it makes it an economic imperative to engage in the kinds of things that we're only beginning to, and it has for 3 decades. My comments about Asheville, North Carolina, which I also know very well, serves the Appalachians, which is a fundamentally different type of diversity and need of economic development. I was just curious, and I don't mean to make a mountain out of a molehill. I apologize. It was just of interest to me. Why Lane County? My bias is that, forgive me, I'm almost done. My bias is that sometimes units of government who need to be focusing all their attention on needs in their communities compete for recognitions from other units of government, and I just view it through those lenses. That's all. And forgive me for any comments that sounded critical. More curious. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and in the case of this, and this is one that, we're not attempting to compete with anyone. We're responding to a request for us to share our story with others, and we also think that there's a lot that we have to learn. I think one of the things certainly that's interesting around our equity work in this organization is a reflection on the history of the state of Oregon and the significant amount of racial prejudice and policy and laws that have existed historically throughout the state that have caused the inequities that exist and, frankly, the lack of diversity that exists in the state. And that is a significant juxtaposition to some of the communities that you referenced in North Carolina and California. So I think on the surface, you can look at maps and the demographic makeup of those communities and compare them to Lane County and go, wait, how do we how is this even a comparison?
That's all
It's
I was
not.
doing, yeah.
But I think our history, we bring a different history to the table than the other communities that I noted that have a much different demographic makeup and background. And that's our intent, is really to talk about that history and the fact that, you know, these policies have existed. Many of them are gone. Most of them are gone now, but we're still recovering from the inequities that were created as a result of those historical inequities, particularly through policy.
Commissioner Flair?
Thank you, Chair Buck. You know, a great answer, Ms. Mokrasky, regarding the juxtaposition. I found it curious a couple of years ago that I was invited to talk at NACO about our efforts in Lane County on housing and certain things that were progressing forward. The two other speakers were the mayor of Baltimore and the administrator of Fulton County, Georgia, which is Atlanta. So how does Lane County stack up against Baltimore and Atlanta in terms of our meager, modest efforts regarding housing compared to the massive efforts that have gone underway in both of those communities? Well, it was exactly that how do you do it in Oregon, which is starkly different to the way we do it in Baltimore and the way we do it in Fulton County. So, and they did learn from us. Now, whether or not their lessons are something they can take to the doorstep, and that's a pun on what they actually did in Baltimore's front doorsteps was a big issue there. But they learned from the way we could do it with the resources that we have and also with the demographic makeup that we have here. So I think your response to Commissioner Bernie, I listened to very intently, and I think that was very, very well stated, that how do you do it in Oregon, which is really far more monocultural than the other communities that you were there with, that were being not in competition, but that were being recognized for efforts based upon everything that goes into the effort.
One other comment, Chair Buck, and we have a couple minutes, that I would just share, because I think this is I appreciate the question that was asked and the discussion that sort of results from that. That Lane County has had a history of scarcity of resources, right? We all know that history of heavy reliance on timber funding and an artificially low property tax rate because of all that timber funding, and then property tax caps go into effect and the timber funding declines, and here we are with a scarcity of resources and at least 2 to 3 decades of decline in funding and decline in services. And there's a tendency in that environment for a mentality of we can't do anything because we don't have enough money to persist. And I think to me, one of the benefits of participating, of being asked to participate, of leading on initiatives, and one of the things we've tried to create in this organization, in the community, is more of a mentality of we can do a lot. Let's not focus on what we can't do. Let's focus on the most important things for us to lead on. And when we have that mindset of we can do a lot, we can accomplish a lot, we can be successful at the things that we really set our minds on, even with a scarcity of resources, it changes the impact that we can have in particularly in the community. And so just in terms of the value of us participating in these different sort of conversations about important issues, I think there is value in us sort of raising the bar and the expectation for the quality of how we lead on important issues.
Good. Well, I think we're ready to move in to our 11 a.m. time certain, which is item 10B, a presentation on Census 2020, Lane County Counts. Extremely important for our area and our state. And with us is Brenda Wilson, Director of the Lane Council of Governments. And it looks like we're getting a presentation ready here. Welcome, Brenda. When technical challenges are solved, feel free.
No, I can do that. Yeah, thank you, though. We'll figure this out. All right. Whoever was here before had much longer legs than me. My feet aren't touching the ground. Okay. Well, good morning, Chair Buck and members of the board. Again, my name is Brenda Wilson. I'm the Executive Director of the Lane Council of Governments, and I am the coordinator for the Complete Count Committee for Lane County. I volunteered for that because this is very important. Working with Dr. Michelle Mayer from the U.S. Census Bureau on that. Complete count committees were started all throughout the United States with an effort to get as close as to 100% count of census tracts throughout the United States, especially those hard-to-count populations. And in Oregon, they are set up across the state as well. Most of the coast is separated from inland communities, however, but I worked with the U.S. Census Bureau so that Lane County had just one complete count committee so that we could work together to ensure a high vote for Lane County. So with that, I'll go through this presentation. Happy to answer questions at any time. Let me see if I can figure out how to do this here. There we go. Okay. Well, why do we do the census? I know that sounds like an easy question to answer, but a lot of people don't know. But we do the census because the U.S. Constitution requires us to do that once every 10 years. But more importantly, we do the census because it helps distribute over $700 billion of federal funding annually. It helps determine the drawing of congressional and state legislative boundaries, school districts, and voting precincts, the number of U.S. House of Representatives seats, and there is speculation that the state of Oregon could gain a House seat this go-round if we do a really good job of counting our population and other states do a poor job of counting theirs. And it also provides information to policymakers for planning for the future, especially over the next 10 years until the next census. So, what funds are distributed? Some of that $700 billion annually are programs that you're very familiar with: Medicaid, Medicare, transportation planning, construction dollars, Head Start, other education programs, free and reduced lunch, WIC, health programs, energy assistance programs are all determined. That funding is distributed based on population, so it's very important to make sure that we have our count right, because that population count is basically carved in stone for the next 10 years. So, the primary goal of the 2020 census is to count everyone once and count them in the right place, and that right place is April 1st. So this has been going on for the last couple of years. The very first thing that needed to be done, and I know Chair Buck and Commissioner Sorensen, you've received paperwork from the Census Bureau about validation of addresses in Lane County. So the Lane Council of Governments has been working with jurisdictions for the last 2 years to make sure that all of the addresses in every census tract in Lane County have been verified. We sent those in, we scrubbed those addresses, we double-checked them with the U.S. Census Bureau, and we recently sent in our verification. So according to us and the U.S. Census Bureau, they now have validated addresses for every household in Lane County. And locations of those households that don't have a real address. So households that are at the end of a gravel road after you turn the corner and past the big old oak tree. So they have those as well. So the next stage, which we are in right now, is educating people, motivating them to respond to the census. Then we'll count them, and then that report will be presented at the federal level. So where are we going to count people? We're going to count them where they are on April 1st. That is where they primarily live and sleep. For babies that are born and still in the hospital, it will be where they will live after they get out. But where they primarily are living and sleeping on April 1st. That means all of the students at the University of Oregon that are here from California that think they will be counted in California, those are our students on April 1st because they'll be in school and we should count them.
Is their driver's license irrelevant then? For their citizenship? Like if they're a foreign student from Hong Kong, or they're a California resident who's in Eugene to go to the university, how does that work?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, their citizenship and their country of origin is irrelevant. We're going to count everyone who's in Lane County sleeping or living here on April 1st.
Okay, so if their driver's license is in California, that doesn't matter. If they're here, they're residing here, they're sleeping here, that's the dominant issue.
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, that is correct.
Yeah, thanks.
So a household is everyone who occupies a housing unit. That can be a house, an apartment, group housing. And it's everyone who's in that unit, even if they are unrelated to each other. Only one person per household needs to respond, however. Each household will receive an invitation where the household has a number attached to the household. The people in the household do not have numbers attached to them. We want to count everyone in every household. So the timeline, and this is important because this is coming up, I'm getting more and more questions. You may get questions too. So beginning March 12th, people will start receiving a paper invitation in the mail inviting them to respond to the census. And the 2020 census will be the first time that people can respond online. They can do so with their smartphones. They can do so at libraries, any computer. They can also respond over the phone or call the U.S. Census Bureau and ask for a paper form. But it'll be the first time that they can respond online. So between the 12th and the 20th of next month, people will start receiving invitations. Those invitations will have a special household number on them, and they will use that to input their household identification to respond to the census. If they haven't responded, they will receive they'll receive a reminder letter anyways from the 16th of March to the end of March. Then if they haven't responded, from the end of March to April 3rd, so a couple of days after April 1st, they will get a reminder postcard asking them to please respond. From the 8th of April to the 16th of April, they will get yet another reminder, but they will also get a paper census in the mail, encouraging them to respond. And if they still don't respond, they will be visited by a U.S. Census Bureau worker. So, again, people will be invited to respond online. They can respond via the phone. They can respond with a paper census, either the short form or the long form, or they can work with a census employee and respond that way. So 98.7% of Oregon households will receive an invitation in the mail, and 1.3% will receive a census invitation when the census worker drops it off, because it's those addresses, those households in Lane County or Oregon, actually, that don't have a verified address. Less than 1% will be actually counted by a census worker. So that's after all of those reminders go out and people still haven't responded in their contact by a census worker. Census worker will respond for them via a tablet. So 85.3% will receive an English-only invitation, about 2.7% will receive an English-Spanish invitation, and a little over 10% will receive the paper form. So there are two types. There's a short form and a long form. The short form asks only 7 questions, and 83% of households will receive that or be asked to respond to the short form. Longer form includes 34 subjects, and it will be extrapolated out as a representation. What will be asked? There is no citizenship question in 2020. I know that that was a big controversy, and it was a legal issue as well. But basically what's going to be asked on the short form is how many people live in the household, the age, race, and sex of each person in the household, whether the house is rented or owned, whether the person in the household is of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin. This is a very old question that's been on the census, and it's used for statistical purposes only, and the relationship of each person in the household to the person who is responding to the invitation. So Lane County specifically, Lane County, and now this is 2010, so it's history, but it's often reflective. So in 2010, only 79.6% of Lane County households responded. That doesn't mean that only 79.6% were counted. That means they responded. Census workers had to contact the tried to contact the remaining households in Lane County to count them. But I've listed some of the hard-to-count areas in Lane County. So obviously, the West University neighborhood is extremely difficult to count, and in 2010, between 32 and 37% of households, depending on tract in that area, did not respond. Those are students, and I'm working with the U of O because they understand that that is an issue for them. Cresswell, 18% of households did not respond in the 2010 census. In far north Eugene, 10%, and in Florence, between 13 and 15%. In each one of these areas, there was a different reason for non-response. As you can about imagine, in Florence, that's because people live there part-time. But if they're there on April 1st, they should be counted in Lane County.
So before you leave Florence, they feel they've been undercounted for years because of the timing. Because you're counting in before the weather gets nice. And a lot of people in Florence snowbird. And they're in their RV somewhere, in the Southwest. So they're not getting the census, but they're actually own property and spend a majority of their year in Florence. But, prior to April 1st is that prime time for getting away from the rainy season. So you miss a lot of households. And then from basically mid-April, once you're finished reminding people to count through the next November, everybody's living in Florence. So they've really felt undercounted for years. We're disappointed when Cottage Grove passed them up in population according to the census in the last run because they felt undercounted. Is there going to be any effort to change that in some way where Florence can feel like their actual real population's counted? And particularly if you want to start talking transients, like folks attending the U of O, in the summertime, there's probably another 5,000 to 10,000 people on the coast.
It does seem that it is an advantage to southern states, too, like Florida or Arizona would get an advantage from this system of counting on April 1st. But is that a congressionally designated day, April 1st, for the census, or is that something we have some control over?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Bozovich, and Commissioner Sorensen, the points you make are very big concerns. It is a congressional, I do believe it, and I'm not exactly sure, I do believe it is in the U.S. Constitution, so it would be very difficult to change. But it's definitely a federal thing. It's not something that we can do. If someone is just on the road traveling, however, they should be counted where their residence is. So if they are not really living in Arizona and they are just visiting there, they should be responding to the census with their household number attached to their household in Florence. And so I'm working with the city of Florence to try to get the word out. During their State of the City address, the mayor actually made an announcement about the census and how important it is, and we'll continue to work with them to make sure that people understand that if they're just on the road, they should respond to the census stating that they live in Florence. And so hopefully with additional education, we can get that count up there because it is a disadvantage.
How about the people who are homeless in Florence?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Farr, for the people that are homeless not only in Florence but in all of Lane County and the state of Oregon, the U.S. Census Bureau is very aware of that. The U.S. Census Bureau right now has a huge hiring campaign where they will hire thousands of census workers across the United States, and a majority of those census workers will be working to count the homeless population. Yeah.
Not unlike our appointed time count, but maybe a little more robust even. Thank you.
Correct, the best as they can, because resources in our communities are used by people who are homeless as well. And so we should count everyone who is in Lane County on April 1st.
That's my only question. Thank you.
Yes. So for...
I'll wait till you're done.
Oh, okay. For Lane County, we estimate that about 361,000 people live in 150,000 households. About 7,800 live in group quarters. 99.6% of Lane County residents will receive the letter. Less than 1% will get that hand-delivered. And approximately 42,000 people in Lane County live in hard-to-count neighborhoods. So what are hard-to-count populations across the board? Children under the age of 5. For some reason, and this has been going on for census after census, people who respond to the census don't count their children who are under the age of 5. We don't know why. It's an interesting phenomenon where getting the word out. Was recently interviewed by the Siuslaw News. I don't know if you've had a chance to see that article. Came out yesterday, but I asked him to please make that point that people need to count their children who are age 5 and under. So racial and ethnic populations, non-English speakers, immigrants, renters who move around a lot, overcrowded housing units where multiple people live in single rooms, gated communities, people who are displaced by natural disasters, young mobile adults, single-parent households, and people experiencing homelessness. So those are the populations that are going to be targeted. So you can see this map, the U.S. Census. Actually, it's not the U.S. Census Bureau, but a map that was put together for the U.S. Census Bureau. You can click on any census tract in the United States, in Lane County in Oregon, and you can see the makeup of that census tract and what the count was in the last one. So those orange colors right there. These are the non-response areas in Lane County from 2010. So you can see that the yellow had a 70 to 73% mail return rate. The bright orange ones had a 0 to 60% mail return rate.
What's the female return rate?
Actually, Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, I could actually dig those numbers out for you.
Dig his tongue out of his cheek.
You can also see those households that are single-parent households, which also can have an impact on their response rate. So I created this map. This map doesn't exactly exist, but I thought it would be interesting to show because this map shows these non-response areas. But this map shows other areas in Lane County that don't have as high of non-response, but have non-response rates for one reason or another. And each one of these areas has a non-response rate for a particular reason. So Tract 5, which is very large, is primarily Hispanic or Native American, primarily not immigrants, so primarily born in the United States, but also age 65 and older. And so each one of these census tracts that I've highlighted yellow have a different demographic makeup, which could explain why the response rate was so low. So as we're looking at educating people in Lane County, encouraging them to respond, our strategy for each one of these tracts should be different. For instance, tract number 43, which is in the middle there, primarily crowded households, which means more than one person lives in each room, primarily Hispanic, but not English as their second language, primarily English, age 35 to 54 and 65 and older. So again, each tract will have a different strategy because there's a different reason for that response rate. So for people who don't speak English, it's a good thing to know that the internet response will be in 12 different non-English languages, but the instructions will be in 59 non-English languages and will include American Sign Language, Braille, and large print for people to be able to gather information about the census and also be able to respond. The information that people present to the U.S. Census Bureau in their response is confidential. A lot of people are worried that that will be used against them, but the sole purpose of it is to gather general statistical information. By law, no one is permitted to reveal that, and as a matter of fact, there was a court case that went to the Supreme Court where a federal agency tried to get information from the U.S. Census Bureau using the Patriot Act as the justification, and the Supreme Court said no. So the goals and challenges that we have in Lane County is we need to educate and motivate people to respond to the census. We need to assure people that their data is confidential and secure, and that they won't be tracked down for not responding or for responding based on the information that they've submitted. We need to educate people about the importance, and we need to support agencies in getting the word out and assisting people in responding. So educate people, encourage them, and engage with other organizations to make sure that we are reaching out and contacting those hard-to-count groups and make sure that everyone is counted. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. We had some questions already. I have one. Commissioner Berney.
Thank you. I was writing down, I didn't want to interrupt you. One, could we have a copy of the PowerPoint?
Oh, of course, yes, I think that.
It's now attached.
It wasn't when I
It
looked.
wasn't. I just got an update this morning that that was attached, as well as our afternoon meeting with Homes for Good. That is now attached as well.
Thank you. The chair always makes me, I'm a little late. Take any agency. Do you have a list of the agencies you work with to reach out to the hard to track populations that you discussed? And then second question of this one, what does your interface, how do you support them getting an accurate count?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Berney, sometime in the mid last year, we started a committee, the Complete Count Committee, which we called Lane County Counts, invited representatives from agencies across the county to participate, understanding that people are very busy. Like I said earlier, one of the reasons I volunteer is because I know this is very important, so try to make it as easy as possible to them. We have a listserv. People can join that listserv. Every week, I send out at least one email that has information about getting education out, links to media posts, talking points, also traveling around, visiting like I am with you today. I prepared a summary of a program that the U.S. Census Bureau has this time called Statistics in School. It's a whole entire set of resources and tools that teachers can incorporate into their lesson plans to teach about the census and encourage students to go home and talk to their parents about the importance of responding to the census. So instead of individual agencies and organizations having to gather this information themselves, I'm gathering it and I'm pushing it out so people can use it. I'm also working with statewide organizations to work on getting the count of hard-to-count populations. And so on April 2nd, and I just confirmed it this morning, actually, April 2nd's the day after the census is due, but we know that there'll be people who would not have responded. So we'll be doing a pop-up census party in the park blocks. We'll get the word out. We'll have people there with tablets, so if people have not responded, they can come on down to the park blocks. We'll get people responding to the census at that point. Working with libraries to set up stations, getting them education for their staff so that they can answer questions for people who come in. So someone who's experiencing homelessness could walk into a public library and respond to the census that way as well. And so there are a lot of different efforts going on right now to try to get to those hard-to-count populations.
That's awesome and very comprehensive answer. And thank you. Have you heard of a group called, I'm sure you have, Oregon Futures Lab?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Berney, no, I haven't.
Oh, well, listen, I was at a young man's campaign kickoff, the first, to my knowledge, Hispanic young man running for city council, young person of any age running for city council in Springfield. And the stories I heard from a lot at the Arc of Lane County, the stories I heard of people that no matter what you've shared are still feeling fear about that. And even though, as you said, ethnicity or ethnic data is only used for statistical purposes. That's not how they feel in this environment. So I learned, and if I may, I'd like to connect you with them, but this is a group of people concerned about the census count in Oregon for hard-to-reach populations, and they actually have people that will help. And Lane County is one of 5 counties they've targeted. So you are the right person to connect them with,
Yes.
correct? Great. Another question. Did I hear you say that we might get another congressional district, and that this relates to all sorts of allocations of resource if we count well and other parts of the country don't? Is that what you said?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Bernie, that's correct. We are at that population tipping point where we could, because if you think about it like a tray with a bunch of marbles on it, when you shake it and level out those marbles, that's U.S. House of Representatives is determined by population. And so where population goes down in parts of the country, they could stand to lose congressional seats. Where population rises, those areas could stand to gain. And we know our population is growing. So yes, we could gain another U.S. House of Representatives seat, which is
Hopefully that's
one
not
reason.
contingent on other people doing a bad job.
If I may add to that, I was actually just listening to a news report either this morning or yesterday afternoon that was saying it was representatives from Texas where they have not invested in the census count, much to some people's dismay, where Oregon or other states have really funneled some money towards this particular issue, and they're actually feeling like that may weaken their count significantly. Yeah.
And I'll just mention that one of the concerns that I have about a possible undercount in Oregon is that we are one of the states that is poised to perhaps get another seat and not be on the losing end, but on the gaining end. But the spread between the populations of the districts that are very high in population would be like Montana, that lost a seat a few years ago, and they went into nearly 700,000 people for their one seat. Meanwhile, over on the losing end, or possibly losing end, the New Hampshire seats, the 2 New Hampshire seats are close to 350,000 people each. So their population, if it stays the same, they may lose a seat, and Montana may, depending on the growth rate since the last time around. So you look at the big growth states like Florida, Texas, and you may well see that they change because they've had a full count, complete count, or they may be disadvantaged by failing to count all the people in their constituency. So it's really to our advantage. I don't think we've gone quite as far as California in counting. California set up their own census, and so they could have like a practice run, if you will, for the federal census. And that's something I think we ought to think about for our future agendas down the road, and I mean really future, like 5 years from now, to get the Oregon legislature to do a state census about 6 months ahead of the federal census, so that we have a population that's informed about why this is so important and have the same privacy and confidentiality restrictions on a state census that we would use for a federal census. So I know, Brenda, you love to have more things to do in your job, and maybe you'll be doing this, or maybe your successor would be, but I just think that's a great idea, that we look down the road and go, well, what are some of the practical barriers? Well, having a state census, maybe a year in advance, that could be used for purposes of allocating state funding. But I just thought when California did that, it was going to really help them in this census. And I'd like to yield back to Commissioner Bernie, whose time we all stole.
Thank you.
Only you stole it, sir.
No, several of us.
No, Heather was adding to Brenda's statement. I just wanted to make one more statement, if I may. It seems that that with the constraints that Oregon is experiencing, with the larger than many states homeless population, which will be very difficult to count, with the in-migration that is occurring in this state now, and it doesn't look like it will be ending anytime soon, I'm presuming all that underscores the need to try and count each and every person. Is that correct? And if I'm sorry, and even though I appreciate the political stuff, I'm far more interested also in its repercussions for all of those social service programs that you had on the list.
Chair Buck, Commissioner Bernie, I absolutely agree. It is imperative that we count, to get as close to a complete count in Oregon as possible. The governor has set up a task force, Oregon Counts. They're doing the same thing. They know they can't be everywhere, but they're trying to make it as easy as possible by providing talking points, media posts, Twitter, Instagram, all of that stuff that those young kids are using these days. But that's how to get the information out so that people don't have to. And it's as easy as making an announcement at the beginning of a public meeting, and when you're out meeting with your constituents, to remind them that it's coming, and to remind them how important it is. And it's not something that's important sort of in the distant future or important to someone who knows someone you know. It impacts everyone on a daily basis, and it will for the next 10 years, because once the count is done, that's the count that's used for the next 10 years.
Very good. Any other comments? Commissioner Bozevich?
Thank you. So, we've spoken a little bit about homeless and RVs and snowbirders and some other and student populations that are difficult to count. One of the things I have a concern about is how are we going to assist folks that may be mentally incapacitated or physically disabled in getting them counted, including there's a significant amount of our population that has addiction issues and could care less about a census. So how are we going to try and make sure we're counting some of those folks that are actually going to have assistance that get counted?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Bozevich, again, getting the education out, information to those groups that work with them, like Senior and Disability Services. So I presented to our advisory groups, asked them to think of ways that we could reach out. And so if someone lives in a household and they have not responded, they will be visited by a census worker who will help them respond to that census. Now, for someone who has addiction issues, is not cooperative. I don't know how the U.S. Census Bureau handles that. It is illegal to respond on someone's behalf. It is perfectly fine to assist someone in responding. So
Interesting.
I think that line is a little blurry.
Yeah. So I guess we may need to reach out to folks like Emergence and Willamette Family and all that to maybe talk to them about talking to their clientele and maybe providing some of that assistance. It is really an important thing to get a fair and accurate count. We do this once every 10 years, and there's so much that gets based on this count. So I'm fully supportive of doing whatever we can to get that count. I am going to use the opportunity of you being in front of us to ask you about a different topic a little bit. As the chief executive of LCOG, I have heard from some folks in the planning community that there has been a change in the process for assigning hearings officials to cases. Has there been any change in that?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Bozevich, yes. As you know, Gary Darnell, one of our LCOG's staff attorneys, and has been the hearings official for many, many years. Maybe a lot of people don't realize this, but he retired a really, really long time ago, and he is slowly reducing his workload. Ann Davies, who is another staff attorney who actually specializes in land use, she is picking up some more of that workload. So we are transitioning Gary's workload to her as a hearings official so that Gary may eventually actually be able to retire.
What I'm concerned about is I heard that it was specific to who was involved in the appeal, that he was being not assigned to any appeals by certain parties and on certain subjects like forest dwellings and a few other types of appeals. Is it just that he's getting less work, or is there specific topics he's not getting?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Bozovich, not exactly, and so we're not picking and choosing which cases he's on, but we are paying more attention to any cases where there is any perception that there may be, Gary's been in our region for a really long time, and he knows a lot of people. And so concern was raised about Gary presiding over cases where he may know the parties. And we didn't want anyone to think there was even the perception of favoritism. So if there is a situation where Gary knows one of the parties, then we're going to have Ann handle that hearing so that everyone knows that hearing was conducted fairly. Even if there is no favoritism or anything like that, we didn't want the perception to exist.
That concern, was that expressed by an elected official, or who brought that concern to LCOG?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Bozovich, staff did.
Yeah, I just have to say I'm a little concerned about what I'm hearing, because I'm hearing specifically that certain parties are getting to choose their judge, basically. And as far as when it comes to anything that's quasi-judicial or judicial, you're not allowed to choose your judge. And the fact that they're trying to disqualify Mr. Darneal from actions that have a certain law firm involved in it bothers me. Because I think what it's trying to do is set up a thing where he's not doing any cases with a certain party involved in the appeals.
Well, Chair Buck, Commissioner Bozovich, I agree that you should not be able to choose your judge. However, it is a common practice for an adjudicator who is familiar with or has some sort of conflict of interest to note that and sometimes not be the one who adjudicates that. So that's the only thing we're trying to.
As long as it's Mr. Darneal making that decision and not staff or somebody outside asking for that. And that's what I understood, was there was actually outside pressure to make this decision. So I appreciate the fact that I had you for a minute and got a chance to ask that question publicly, because I wanted to be able to ask that publicly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'd be happy to have a more conversation on this.
Because our agreement around hearings officials is an intergovernmental agreement that was voted on by the entirety of the board, and I don't think there was any single person that was allowed to have influence on that contract. So I just want to make sure there wasn't. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Commissioner Farr.
Forgive me for redirecting us back to the census. I have a couple of questions. We use technology, you mentioned Twitter and other social media, using technology to reach out and make the census more accurate. I guess that's probably a part of it, is trying to continually make the census more accurate, realizing it's not going to be accurate. It's not going to be 100% infallible and accurate, not unlike our point-in-time count. So just kind of a curious thing, I think about censuses that were 100 years ago, when they didn't have follow-up mail even, so it's pretty remarkable what you're able to do and the technology you're able to apply to that. So that's not really a question, other than the confidence that you have that we are accurate in our counts. Everybody says it's so important that we're exactly accurate. We're not exactly accurate, never going to be. How confident are you that we're as accurate as the rest of the nation?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Farr, I think we're going to do the best that we possibly can to be as accurate as we possibly can. That's a really wishy-washy answer, isn't it?
It's a wishy-washy question. That's the only answer you could possibly get.
I think that, you know, a lot of people don't know about the census or they've forgotten. I think reminding people that it's coming, and more importantly, reminding them how it impacts themselves, their neighbors, their families, their communities. I think that's what we're trying to do differently this time, getting the information out. Every couple of days, LCOG sends out some sort of information on its Facebook page about the census, and just reminding people how it's going to work, right? So what we can't do is right now we can't post what a U.S. Census worker's badge looks like, because that would be scooped up real quick and used for nefarious reasons. But even educating people on when a census worker will come. Right now, there is a census document that's circulating right now that looks like a census document, but it is not. And at the bottom of it, it actually asks for a donation, which is kind of disturbing. So we're educating people that that's not a census form and they shouldn't respond to that unless they want to make a donation. That's up to them. But just education, I think. The more education information we can get out, the more accurate account we can get.
That was a wonderful answer that went far beyond my question, because that really does, it addresses a lot of the concerns that people have regarding accuracy and regarding privacy. You've mentioned privacy several times and how important that is. But it brings me back to another absolutely important count that we do, and that is our point-in-time homelessness count. And Chair Buck, the reason I'm bringing this up is that resources are allocated based upon the count. And if we are painstakingly accurate, we spend more time being accurate than other parts of the country, then resources are allocated disproportionately based upon our accuracy and their inaccuracy. So it's easy to be inaccurate on the high side in order to potentially sway the resources in your direction, as it is for us to be absolutely accurate on the accurate side. You know, so I worry. Worry is not the right word. You know, I'm alert to the fact that other areas may not be as accurate as we are, and that resources end up being reallocated based on inaccuracy while we're spending as much resources as we do to make it accurate. And we do the same thing with the point-in-time count. You know, we dig deep to try and be as accurate as we can, understanding that we're never going to be fully accurate, whereas other communities don't put the same type of effort we put in. And it's as easy to overestimate as it is to underestimate. And if the resources come based upon overestimation, there may be a natural inclination to do such.
Commissioner Berney.
Good point.
I cannot speak for the board. The chair does that, but I'm going to speak for myself. I'm very, very happy that it's you and your organization that is implementing this critical count. I mean, the significance of that underlying so much is phenomenal. I want you to know that as a result of your presentation, before I make any statements to any group, and there are lots of them I learn, I'm always going to make a statement about the census, what it means for our community, how critical the count is, et cetera. So I just want to let you know from me personally, thank you so much for volunteering to do this. It's huge. And I'm very comfortable with your overseeing the operation.
Chair Buck, thank you. And I'm happy to provide you with any information or materials that you may need.
I will ask for them, and I am going to provide you with a connection to another organization that wants to help.
Commissioner Sorensen.
I wanted to get beyond the actual period of time when you're going to make the count and when the census, more accurately, the census, federal census, is going to make the count. When does that information get released?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, you mean the final population counts?
Yeah.
They will
like
be
April
presented.
2?
No. As a matter of fact.
Iowa Democratic Party is involved in the release of the information, or we don't know.
Well, if they are, they will release that information in December.
Okay.
Yes, but the U.S. Census Bureau will continue to try and count people through July.
Okay. So it's a like 3-month period when they'll kind of relate back to April 1 as to where people live.
Correct.
Okay. And then by roughly December 1, local governments will be given information, or the public will be given information, or will it be on the census website, or how would that actually happen?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, a report is first presented to the President of the United States and then released to the public in December.
So in terms of one of the many uses of the census will be the redistricting of the Board of Commissioners. That information should be publicly available by the 1st of December.
That's the plan.
The plan, okay. And is that at the census tract level at that point?
Yeah, Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, yeah, each tract has its own count. And the count not only of population, but the demographic breakdown for each tract. And we have that information from the 2010 census as well. And so it'll be broken down the same way. So it's the census tract information is race, poverty level, age, type of household, renter, owner, English speaking, their immigrant status. Trying to think of other items that are on.
Not citizenship.
Not citizenship, no.
Okay, and so that information will be available to the public and to the county government as we move from December 1st into the 2021 redistricting year. For both the legislature and for the Board of Commissioners and the other jurisdictions that need to make redistricting decisions.
Correct.
Okay, thank you so much.
Any other comments? All right, thank you so much. And I just want to remind everybody who is either listening or watching that you said jobs are available.
Yes.
A lot of jobs are
A lot of jobs, Chair Buck. Thank you so much. They can go to the U.S. Census Bureau website and click on the link jobs. They're flexible. Some of them will last until fall because of the count, but there are thousands of openings with the U.S. Census Bureau.
great. So if you need a spring, summer gig, it's available.
Yes.
We'd love to have you, as we all spoke about how critical this count really is for the next decade and beyond. So I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
You so much. And we'll all try to be champions up here as to getting people excited and interested in turning in their census sheets.
Thank you
or
so much.
on
Really
the
appreciate the opportunity.
computer. Absolutely. All right, well, with that, we will move into our lunchtime and we'll recess until 1:30 back here in Harris Hall. Was I supposed to only do one?